Hey guys, Negative9 here, how's it going everybody? And in today's video I wanted to do a little bit of a review on Guild Wars 2's second expansion, Path of Fire. Before I start, I would like to give a little bit of a disclaimer here. Now, I am a long-time Guild Wars 2 player and I have been playing this game since the launch in 2012, so by default this review is coming from someone who generally likes the game already. So if you're someone who doesn't really like the core mechanics of Guild Wars 2, like the dynamic event system or the combat system, then there might be a little bit of a disconnect in our thoughts on this expansion. Now with that said, let's get into the review. So the first thing I want to talk about in this review are the maps. The maps were a point of controversy in the previous expansion, Heart of Thorns, but in Path of Fire I think they actually got them spot on. While we only got 5 new open world maps in Path of Fire, only one more than Heart of Thorns, the size of the maps is far greater and they feel much more worthy of an expansion. I'm almost certain that the maps that were brought in Path of Fire are the biggest ever implemented into Guild Wars 2 to date. In Path of Fire we make our way into the Crystal Desert and parts of Alona, where many of the maps have a desert theme to them, which I personally was really looking forward to as it's a biome that we haven't really seen much of before now. The desert looks just as good as I thought it would, with some great vast areas filled with sand and some great Alonian architecture, but the new zones do a really good job of keeping the land diverse looking, with plenty of fertile green areas along the water, plenty of rock structures, sulfurous wastes, and of course, dragon corrupted land. In fact, we even see some snow in this expansion up in the Desert Highlands map. So while you definitely feel as if you're in a desert for most of the expansion, there is a lot of variety to keep you visually engaged. My only complaint with the maps so far is that while there's enough content in the maps, there's a distinct lack of that classic Guild Wars 2 epic boss battle meta event like we saw in Heart of Thorns. But that may not be a bad thing because it means you'll never get to a zone and realize the entire map is basically locked down because the meta event failed. But then again, it still would have been nice to have seen a big monster in the open world just for old time's sake. With this massively increased map size, the developers made the decision to add mounts into the game, and mounts are something that I honestly never thought we'd see in Guild Wars 2, but ArenaNet went ahead and surprised me, and I'm really glad they did. You can really see the work they put into the mounts in this expansion, and all 5 of them are extremely well polished and responsive. Each mount makes traveling the desert fun in a different way, and each mount's unique characteristics allow you to reach areas that you never would have been able to gain access to before. Through the mastery system, you can also upgrade and develop your mount's abilities to make them even more versatile. By leveling up your masteries, you can increase the leap distance on your raptor, or train your jackal to jump through sand portals found throughout the desert. One of the major pluses of new mounts is it made traveling through old vanilla zones way more interesting. I was actually really excited to take my mounts back to Corteria and see how they made the maps engaging again. The biggest negatives that mounts brought to the game is that if you want to get any of the 30 new skins that have been added to the gem store, you're going to have to rely on some heavy RNG or a lot of gems to get the skins that you want. This sparked a lot of controversy in the Guild Wars 2 community, but personally I'm not overly upset about it. It just may be something you might want to know before picking up Path of Fire. Overall though, I'm really happy with the mounts and I think they're definitely one of the standout features of this expansion. So Elite Specializations are sort of a subclass system that Guild Wars 2 has, in which you can unlock a new weapon and set of traits and abilities that is designed to shake up your profession. Being completely honest, I have limited experience with the Elite Specializations in this expansion, as I've only played on the Firebrand, on my main character, and the Scourge so far. However, I've very much enjoyed the Firebrand in particular because it fulfills my dreams of being a dedicated Burn Guardian and actually being viable in most game modes. Although I have heard of a couple balance issues with some of the Elite Specializations to this point, but so far, at least Firebrand has lived up to my expectations. Moving swiftly on, let's talk about the story. The story is one of the main reasons that I play Guild Wars 2, so this is probably one of the most important things I would judge this expansion off of. In terms of the length of the story and how long it takes to complete all the missions, I'm pretty happy. Heart of Thorns was painfully short, and I really wouldn't be surprised if there was a lot of cut content back in that expansion, but in Path of Fire, if there was cut content, I do not think it was in the story. The story felt like a really good length to me, but I don't think the time to complete will be the same for everybody, so it's kind of hard to judge. There were a few times where the game sort of tells you have to come back after you've completed X or Y objective to make sure you don't really blow through the story in one go, but I think if you really wanted to, you could probably play through it all in a day. The story itself didn't have too many surprises, and it was pretty much as advertised, but that isn't necessarily a bad thing. It didn't blow me out of the water, but what it did very well and with a great amount of polish. This expansion had some of the most detailed and well-crafted instances I've ever seen in this game to date, as well as some really great cutscenes. I am starting to become frustrated by the lack of nuance in the overall story of Guild Wars 2 though. As I mentioned in my previous video where I sort of discussed if traditional questing would be a good system to add to Guild Wars 2, I'm not a huge fan of the whole fate of the world story where in every expansion we have to save the world from this threat or that. Eventually it's going to be hard to come up with new threats that are actually compelling, and like I said, that's not necessarily a criticism of Path of Fire, but more the preceding content that we've had since release. Overall, I'm really happy with the story. The production quality was probably the best we've seen in the existence of Guild Wars 2, and there were definitely some moments where I was really engaged, but like I said, there were no surprises. If you know the story of Guild Wars 2 to this point and you don't mind it, then you're probably going to enjoy the story about as much as I did. So as you may have gathered by now, Path of Fire hasn't really done a whole lot wrong. What they announced was pretty much what they delivered. The problem I have is more with what wasn't announced than what was. There are a lot of things that bug me about the current state of Guild Wars 2 that this expansion did not address at all. The first being PvP. Being completely honest, Guild Wars 2 PvP has not been in a good place for quite a while now. World vs. World seems bland these days, and outside of Tier 1 servers, there just seems to be a lack of players who care about the game mode at all. And that's really sad to see considering it was a hallmark of the game at release, and a really core game mode for anyone who played back then. Heck, my first experiences in the game and the betas were all mostly in World vs. World. And as for structured PvP, well, that's not doing so hot either. A lot of top structured PvPers have left the game, and I often hear about serious balance issues. Unfortunately, Path of Fire did very little, if anything, to address these problems, and a huge part of an MMO is the PvP. It's what I remember most fondly from games like World of Warcraft, and I think it's critical to the success of any MMO. I would have really liked to see Path of Fire try to bring in new PvP maps or anything to bring people back to the game mode, and that's definitely a big negative for me. Secondly, as Guild Wars 2 is an MMO, you would think there'd be a heavy focus on community-related systems. Besides a new guild hall, we got zero new content for guilds to work towards. Guild Wars 2 these days sometimes feels like more of a single-player game than an MMO, because it doesn't really have any reason for players to actually talk to each other and communicate. Sure, you do events together, but then you kind of just all disperse off into the world again, and I miss the feeling I used to get from older MMOs, where there's actually a feel as if the game's populated by thousands of people. At the end of the day, the social side of the game and having people to play with is what keeps people playing long term. ArenaNet can't expect people to stick with the game when they play solo the whole time. For a game entitled Guild Wars, there's a real lack of focus on community-related features, and that's definitely another big negative. But after playing this game for the past 5 years, I have enough experience with the developers to know that they probably see these issues for themselves, and they aren't the kind of company that will ignore these problems. The game has improved a lot since 2012, and I can only see it getting better. And that's sort of my thoughts on Path of Fire. So to summarize for you guys and sort of come up with some sort of verdict, I was really impressed with the size and variety of the maps themselves, which were made even more enjoyable by the introduction of mounts to the game. The mounts were extremely well polished and make moving around the world really fun. However, if you want a lot of mount skins, it may cost you a lot of real cash. The elite specializations were enjoyable, but there may be a few balance issues. The story instances were fantastic and had a real nice handful of cutscenes, while the story itself was simply as advertised. The two really big negatives are the lack of new PvP content and the distinct lack of community-related features, but for the price point of only $30, I think this expansion is a really great value for money. So if I had to give Path of Fire a score on a scale from 1 to 10, I think I would give it an 8. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you thought of the expansion, or if you plan on jumping in for the first time. And if you'd like to see more content like this in the future, be sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching guys, and I will see you guys next time.